Welcome to my channel where nightmares live. This is Midnight Tales.
A group of explorers steps into an abandoned mine sealed for over a century, but what they discover inside is not silence. Whispers echo through the tunnels, voices begging for help in a language no one has ever heard. The deeper they go, the louder the cries become, until something answers. Stay with me, because once you hear what was waiting in the dark, you will never forget it. The mine entrance gaped like the open mouth of something long dead. Rust-covered beams leaned at uneasy angles, threatening collapse. A stale wind rushed out, carrying the scent of damp stone and rusted iron. Flashlights pierced the black, their beams swallowed almost instantly. Each step echoed against the walls, returning louder than it should have. The floor was slick with moisture, glittering like veins of glass. Farther in, the wooden supports creaked as if they remembered pain. Then came the sound. A cry, muffled at first, faint, as though buried under tons of rock. Help! The explorers froze, their breath clouding in the cold air. The voice rose again, louder, desperate. But the words were not in any language they knew. The syllables bent and twisted, scraping against the ear like metal dragged across stone. The deeper they walked, the more voices joined. Dozens. Hundreds. All crying, all begging, overlapping in a maddening chorus. The tunnel narrowed, pressing them closer, the air thick with moisture and whispers. Drips from the ceiling fell like slow, deliberate footsteps. Shadows shifted, though no one moved. One of the explorers whispered, "We are not alone." And the mine seemed to breathe in response. The mine exhaled a low groan that trembled through the rock. Dust sifted from the ceiling, catching in the flashlight beams like falling ash. The explorers pressed forward, though their hearts hammered as if warning them to turn back. The voices grew clearer, closer, yet still utterly alien. Every syllable twisted, wet and jagged, as though the throats that made them had long since decayed. The ground sloped downward. Their boots slid on the slick stone, forcing them deeper. The tunnel split into 3 paths, each one darker than the last. From the left came the sound of weeping. From the right, screams tore the silence like blades. From the center, silence, absolute and crushing. They argued in hushed tones, their words swallowed by the weight of the earth. Finally, they chose the center path. The silence pressed in, heavier than the cries. Even their breathing sounded wrong, too loud, too hollow, echoing with a delay that did not match the tunnel. One explorer raised his flashlight. The beam revealed handprints smeared across the walls. But they were too high. Some were pressed against the ceiling. Others twisted sideways, as if something had crawled along the rock like an insect. The smell grew stronger, rot mixed with burning oil. Their eyes watered, their throats burned, but still they moved forward. Then, movement. A shadow peeled away from the wall and slid into the darkness. The explorers halted, straining to see. Nothing. But the air was alive now. Breathing. Shifting. A whisper slithered past their ears, though none of them spoke. Another. Then a chorus. The alien voices returned, whispering inches away, though no one was there. The tunnel widened into a cavern. Their flashlights caught the glint of metal. Chains. Dozens of chains, hanging from the ceiling like a forest of iron vines. Each one swayed, though there was no wind. The explorers stepped inside. And the voices screamed. A single, unified wail that rattled their bones and shook the chains into violent motion. One of the explorers dropped to his knees, clutching his ears, blood trickling between his fingers. Another shouted his name, but the words were devoured by the shrieking. The flashlights flickered. Darkness surged between the beams, alive, writhing. The cavern walls shifted as if breathing, their surfaces bulging and retreating like the chest of some buried giant. From the chains hung shapes. Not bodies. Not exactly. Outlines of figures, stretched thin, their faces warped into eternal screams, their mouths moving with the voices. The explorers stumbled back, but the entrance to the cavern was gone. Only black stone where the tunnel had been. The voices lowered again, whispering, coaxing, calling. One explorer raised his light. It flickered across the floor. Carvings. Symbols etched deep into the rock, glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the voices. The sound was no longer outside. It was inside their skulls. A pressure. A command. The cavern tightened around them, closing in, forcing them toward the center where the chains met. Something was waiting there. Something that had never stopped calling. The center of the cavern pulsed with a faint, unnatural glow. It leaked upward through the chains, lighting their rusted lengths as though fire burned inside the metal itself. The explorers crept forward, unwilling, their bodies moving as if pulled by unseen hands. Every step felt heavier, the floor dragging at their boots like wet sand. Their breaths came ragged, every inhale tasting of iron and ash. The glow revealed a circle carved into the stone floor. It was ancient, yet the grooves looked freshly cut, edges sharp, as if the rock had bled open only moments before. The chains converged into the circle, sinking into the center where a pit yawned. From the pit came a slow, deliberate sound. Not a voice. Not quite. A wet, rhythmic dragging, like something clawing its way upward. The explorers clutched each other, their flashlights shaking in their trembling hands. The voices swelled again. No longer screams. Chants. Choking, guttural chants in that same unrecognizable language. The cavern shook. Chunks of rock fell, smashing into the ground, but the chains held firm, rattling in unison like the bars of a colossal cage. One of the explorers stepped closer to the pit, unable to resist. His flashlight beam stabbed into the abyss. The light revealed a mass shifting in the dark, slick and glistening, writhing like a nest of serpents. But then, an eye opened. Massive, lidless, the size of a man's head, glaring up with a milky, drowning stare. The chanting stopped. Silence crushed the cavern. And then the voices returned all at once, shrieking in violent ecstasy, so loud that the rock itself cracked. The explorer with the flashlight screamed as chains snapped free from the ceiling and whipped toward him. They coiled around his arms, his legs, his throat. The others rushed forward, but the chains lashed at them like living things, driving them back. The man was dragged to the pit. His body struck the stone, bones breaking with a sickening crunch, yet still he was pulled closer. His flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam cutting across the carvings. The symbols blazed to life, their glow a blood-red pulse that throbbed in time with the chains. The pit roared. Not a sound of air or stone, but a sound of hunger. The explorer's scream was swallowed as he vanished below, dragged into the writhing black. The pit sealed shut behind him, as though the rock itself had healed. The cavern went still. The chains swayed gently, dripping with fresh blood that hissed as it struck the glowing symbols. The remaining explorers stood frozen, their ears ringing, their minds barely clinging to reason. Then the voices returned once more. Not distant. Not alien. Clear. Human. They heard the voice of their friend, calling to them, begging for help, from deep below the stone. And beneath his voice, something else laughed. The laughter slithered through the cavern, cold and jagged, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was not the laugh of a man. It was hollow, stretched, drawn out too long, as though the sound itself had been bent and broken. The explorers staggered back from the pit's sealed surface, their flashlights trembling in their grip. The rock where their friend had vanished was smooth again, but wet, as if it had swallowed him whole. Then his voice came again. Closer this time. It did not echo. It crawled directly into their ears. Help me. The plea was frantic, panicked, but beneath it something distorted each word, twisting it into tones that were not his. One explorer pressed his palms to his head, shaking, whispering, "It is inside. It is inside." The chains rattled once more, though no wind moved. The cavern stretched, impossibly. The walls seemed to bend outward, the shadows deepening until they formed doorways that had not been there before. Narrow openings gaped in the stone, tunnels that breathed with every flicker of light. From each, voices poured. Some wept. Some laughed. Some whispered names that none of them had spoken aloud. The explorers turned in circles, trapped in a storm of sound. Their own names echoed back to them in voices they had never heard. James. Eli. Sarah. Each syllable dragged out like a hand pulling them into the dark. Sarah dropped her light. It spun on the floor, casting jagged arcs of brightness across the cavern walls. For a heartbeat, the beam revealed figures. Men and women in rotted mining clothes, faces pale, eyes hollow. Their mouths were open, stretched impossibly wide, each frozen in a scream. Then the light blinked out. Darkness crashed over them like a wave. The sound of chains filled the void, scraping, sliding, wrapping around unseen stone. Something moved across the floor. Slow. Deliberate. Dragging, as if enormous limbs were pulling themselves closer. The explorers backed toward the cavern wall, their breaths ragged, their shoulders striking cold stone. The darkness pulsed with every sound, alive, thick, pressing against their skin. Then a new voice rose above the others. It was their friend again. But his words were wrong. His cry for help had changed into a chant. Low, guttural, the same language they had heard before. And this time, the voices around him followed. Every whisper, every wail, every scream joined into one great incantation that shook the ground beneath their feet. The stone floor split. A jagged crack tore open across the glowing circle. The earth convulsed as if something massive strained to rise from below. Heat surged from the fissure, carrying the stench of burning flesh. The explorers pressed tighter against the wall, but the cavern offered no escape. Chains lashed out from the ceiling, striking the ground inches from their feet, sparks bursting as metal met stone. The chanting grew deafening, their friend's voice leading it now with inhuman power. The crack widened. From its depths, a pale hand emerged. Long. Thin. Its fingers clawed the stone, nails sharp as rusted iron. And the mine itself seemed to sigh, as if after a century of silence, it had finally begun to wake. The pale hand gripped the stone with impossible strength. Its nails dug trenches into the rock, sparks snapping as though the cavern resisted its presence. The explorers pressed against the wall, eyes wide, lungs refusing to draw a full breath. Every heartbeat pounded like a drum inside their skulls, echoing in time with the chanting. Another hand broke through. This one larger, veins black against its translucent skin, twitching as if alive with something crawling beneath it. The fissure widened, vomiting dust and shards of stone, each tremor threatening to bring the entire mine down. But the mine did not collapse. It held. As if the structure itself wanted this thing to rise. Chains slithered across the cavern floor, circling the explorers, hemming them in. Their flashlights flickered wildly, beams stuttering across the walls like failing stars. For the briefest instant, Sarah's light froze on the figure that emerged from the crack. Its shoulders hunched, its form twisted and skeletal, flesh clinging too tightly to bone. But its head was wrong. It stretched upward, elongated, almost serpentine, with a face that seemed unfinished. Where eyes should have been were pits. Where a mouth should have been was only a split, opening too wide, tearing the skin until it bled. And yet, the voice of their friend spilled from that mouth. Sarah. James. Eli. Hearing their names from that maw broke something inside them. James screamed, a raw and hopeless sound, and bolted toward the chains, trying to break free. The metal snapped to life, coiling around his waist, dragging him back across the stone, sparks exploding beneath his boots. The creature turned its eyeless head toward him. The split in its face widened further, stretching until the skin tore with a wet rip. From the darkness inside, more voices erupted. Children crying. Women begging. Men screaming in languages long forgotten. James's flashlight fell as the chains dragged him toward the pit. Its beam landed on carvings etched into the creature's skin, glowing faintly like burning embers. The same symbols that pulsed in the cavern floor. They writhed and shifted, changing form with every heartbeat. James clawed at the chains, his nails breaking, blood streaking across the metal. The others lunged forward, but more chains struck like whips, forcing them back against the wall. James's scream cut short as he was pulled into the creature's arms. It cradled him almost tenderly. Then, without hesitation, the split in its head opened wider, and it pulled him inside. The sound was indescribable. Bone breaking, flesh tearing, a muffled scream echoing into silence. When it was over, the creature stood taller, stronger, the glow of the symbols brighter across its body. And James's voice joined the chorus. Calling from everywhere at once. Begging. Laughing. Chanting. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing, hands over her ears. Eli pulled her up, his face pale, his eyes locked on the fissure that still widened beneath the creature's feet. Something else was coming. Something larger. The mine shuddered violently, dust raining from above, the ceiling groaning as though it would finally give way. But the walls held firm, trapping them in the nightmare. The creature's eyeless gaze fixed on them once more. Its head cocked at a sickening angle, like a predator studying prey that had nowhere left to run. And then, in perfect, broken English, it spoke. You came when I called. The words hung in the cavern like a noose. You came when I called. The voice was not only sound. It was weight. It pressed into Sarah's chest, tightening her ribs until every breath was shallow. Eli felt it too, his knees buckling as if the air itself had turned heavy and poisonous. The creature straightened, its body cracking like splintering wood. The fissure beneath it pulsed red, the glow throbbing in rhythm with their racing hearts. Chains rattled violently, striking the floor in patterns, like some twisted ritual drum. From the walls, shapes peeled themselves free. Figures of miners, pale and half-formed, their eyes empty sockets, their jaws slack. They stumbled forward, their boots scraping stone, their broken tools still clutched in skeletal hands. The cavern filled with the stench of rotting flesh mixed with sulfur. Sarah gagged, pressing a hand to her mouth. Eli dragged her back, but the chains herded them forward, closer to the pit, closer to the towering figure that had consumed James. The miners whispered as they walked. Low, rasping tones, every word alien, but carried with such conviction that the cavern shook with their faith. The creature raised its arms, its elongated head tilting back. The fissure widened further, a violent crack ripping across the cavern floor, vomiting heat and the sound of grinding stone. Something vast shifted below. A shadow moved in the pit, far larger than the creature that already stood above it. Eli's flashlight flickered across the carvings again, those cursed symbols that writhed on both the ground and the monster's flesh. They pulsed brighter with every heartbeat, their edges dripping as though carved from molten metal. His mind screamed for reason, for sense, but the truth pressed down on him like the crushing weight of the earth itself. This mine had never been abandoned. It had been sealed. Buried. Caged. And they had opened the door. The creature lowered its head again, facing them, its torn mouth stretching into something that was not a smile. More voices, it said, each word cracking like stone under pressure. Sarah screamed as chains lashed around her ankles, dragging her across the floor. Eli grabbed her arms, pulling with all his strength, the metal tearing at his hands, splitting his skin open. Blood slicked the chains, but they did not loosen. Instead, they tightened, pulling Sarah toward the pit's edge. The creature leaned down, its split mouth gaping wide, the chorus of stolen voices roaring from within. Eli's grip slipped. Sarah shrieked as the chains dragged her into the red glow, her body twisting against the stone. He lunged after her, desperate, reckless. But the ground beneath him split, a jagged seam racing outward like lightning. The floor fell away, and Eli dropped to his knees at the very edge of the abyss. From below, the shadow stirred again, vast and coiling, a mountain of flesh shifting in the dark. A sound rose from the pit. Not a voice. Not even a scream. It was a roar so deep it rattled his teeth, a sound that seemed to come from the bones of the earth itself. The cavern trembled, stones splitting, chains whipping wildly through the air like serpents. Sarah's voice cried out one last time. Then was gone, swallowed into the pit. Eli's flashlight clattered across the stone, spinning in frantic circles before its beam landed on the creature's face. For the first time, he saw its skin peeling back, splitting open further, revealing something beneath. Something that was not flesh. Something older. Older than the mine. Older than the world that had buried it. The chanting of the minor shadows grew frenzied, their hollow mouths stretched wide, their whispers bleeding into shrieks. And the creature leaned closer to Eli, its pit mouth dripping with black ichor. "You will stay," it said. The chains began to move again. The chains slid across the stone like serpents, circling Eli, tightening their noose of iron. He stumbled back until his shoulders struck the cavern wall, the cold rock pressing into his spine. There was nowhere left to go. The creature loomed above him, its elongated head blotting out the faint glow of the fissure, its torn mouth dripping black threads of rot. The shadows of the dead miners gathered closer, their hollow eyes fixed on him, their whispers falling silent all at once. For the first time, there was quiet. Eli's chest heaved. The silence was worse than the screams. The creature bent lower, its eyeless face inches from his own. The chains lifted him from the ground, suspending him in the red glow that pulsed from the fissure. His limbs shook, his blood ran down the metal, feeding the carvings on the stone. The symbols flared with a final, blinding light. And in that instant, Eli understood. The mine had not been built to dig ore. It had been built as a prison. The chains were not meant to hold rock. They were meant to hold this. And now the prison was open. The creature's mouth split impossibly wide, tearing until its head was nothing but a black abyss of gnashing sound. From its depths came Sarah's voice. Then James's. Then dozens more. All crying his name. All begging him to join them. The last thing Eli saw was the cavern collapsing inward, not in ruin but in hunger, the stone folding around him as if the earth itself wanted him buried alive. Then the voices swallowed him whole. The mine fell silent. The fissure sealed. The chains stilled. And the entrance to the mine stood once more in the quiet forest, its beams leaning at uneasy angles, its mouth yawning open. Waiting. Listening. Calling.